Single mother defends immigrant neighbor, but when the town turns against her, she uncovers a hidden hatred that threatens even her son and forces her to make an impossible choice. Maria sighed as she hung up her scrubs, the weight of a long night shift at the local hospital finally settling on her shoulders. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, reminding her that Lucas would be up soon, ready for another day of high school. She moved quietly through their modest home, careful not to wake her son just yet. The morning light filtered through the kitchen curtains, casting a warm glow on the well-worn countertops. As she brewed a strong pot of coffee, Maria's mind wandered to the upcoming parent-teacher conference. Lucas was a good kid, but his grades had been slipping lately. She knew the whispers around town, how a boy needs a father figure, how she should have tried harder to make her marriage work. The familiar ache of guilt tugged at her heart, but she pushed it aside. They were doing just fine, the two of them. The aroma of coffee filled the air, and Maria allowed herself a moment of peace before the day truly began. She leaned against the counter, cradling the warm mug in her hands, and gazed out the window at the sleepy street. Mrs. Henderson was already out, tending to her prized roses. The old woman caught Maria's eye and offered a small wave. Maria returned the gesture, grateful for the neighbors who had stood by her side through thick and thin. Footsteps thundered down the stairs, breaking the morning calm. Lucas burst into the kitchen, all gangly limbs and tousled hair. "Mom, have you seen my cleats? I've got practice after school, and I can't find them anywhere." His voice cracked with the telltale signs of adolescence, a reminder of how quickly he was growing up. Maria couldn't help but smile, despite her exhaustion. "Good morning to you too, sunshine," she teased, ruffling his hair as he rummaged through the fridge. "Check the mudroom. I think I saw them there yesterday." Lucas mumbled his thanks around a mouthful of toast and darted off to search. Maria shook her head fondly, marveling at the endless energy of youth. As she packed Lucas's lunch, Maria's thoughts drifted to the day ahead. Another shift at the hospital awaited her, but first she had to swing by the grocery store. Money was tight this month, and she mentally calculated how to stretch their budget. The constant juggling act of single motherhood weighed heavily on her, but she refused to let it show. Lucas deserved a mother who was strong, capable, and present. The sound of a moving truck outside caught Maria's attention. She peered out the window to see a small U-Haul parked in front of the vacant house next door. A young woman with long dark hair was directing the movers, gesturing animatedly. Maria felt a flutter of curiosity and a twinge of apprehension. New neighbors meant change, and in a town this small, change wasn't always welcome. Lucas reappeared, backpack slung over one shoulder and cleats in hand. "Mom, did you see? We're getting new neighbors." His eyes sparkled with excitement at the prospect of something new in their predictable little world. Maria nodded, forcing a smile. "I saw, honey. We'll have to bake them some welcome cookies this weekend, okay?" Lucas grinned and headed for the door, calling out a goodbye over his shoulder. Maria balanced the plate of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies in one hand as she rang the doorbell of the newly occupied house next door. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the porch, and she could hear muffled voices inside. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a woman with tired eyes and a hesitant smile. "Hello," Maria said warmly. "I'm Maria from next door. I thought I'd welcome you to the neighborhood." She held out the plate, noticing how the woman's eyes widened slightly at the gesture. "I'm Anna," the newcomer replied softly, her accent adding a musical lilt to her words. "This is very kind of you. Please come in." As Anna led her into a sparsely furnished living room, Maria caught sight of a young girl peeking around the corner. "And who's this little one?" she asked gently. Anna beckoned to the child, who approached shyly. "This is my daughter, Sophia." "Sophia, say hello to our new neighbor, Maria." The girl mumbled a quiet greeting, her dark eyes curious but wary. Maria settled onto the worn couch, taking in the stack of boxes still waiting to be unpacked. "Moving is always such a hassle," she commiserated. How are you finding it so far? Anna perched on the edge of an armchair, her posture tense. It's different, she admitted. We've moved around a lot, but this is our first small town. Everyone seems to know each other already. A flicker of understanding passed between the two women. Maria leaned forward, her voice low and reassuring. It can be tough breaking into established circles, but not everyone here is closed-minded. Give it time. Anna nodded gratefully, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. As they talked, Maria learned bits and pieces of Anna's story. She'd left her home country under difficult circumstances, seeking a safer life for Sophia. The details were vague, but the pain in Anna's eyes spoke volumes. Maria found herself sharing her own struggles as a single mother, the judgment she'd faced after her divorce, the constant battle to make ends meet. Sophia gradually warmed up to Maria's presence, inching closer to the cookies. Anna watched her daughter with a mixture of love and worry. It's been hard on her, all the moving, she confided. I hope we can finally put down roots here. Maria felt a surge of protectiveness towards this little family. Well, you've got friends in us, she declared. Lucas, that's my son. He'd be happy to show Sophia around town sometime. As the afternoon light began to fade, Maria reluctantly stood to leave. Anna walked her to the door, gratitude shining in her eyes. Thank you for this, she said softly. It means more than you know. Maria squeezed her arm gently. That's what neighbors are for. And hey, us single moms have to stick together, right? The autumn breeze rustled through the changing leaves as Maria and Anna sat on Maria's porch, steaming mugs of coffee warming their hands. The early morning light painted the sky in soft pinks and oranges, a peaceful backdrop to their now familiar routine. Maria watched as Anna took a sip, noticing how her friend's shoulders seemed to relax with each passing day. Sophia's teacher says she's really coming out of her shell, Anna shared, a hint of pride in her voice. She even volunteered to read aloud in class yesterday. Maria beamed, genuinely happy for both mother and daughter. That's wonderful. Lucas mentioned they've been working on a science project together. It's nice to see them becoming friends. Inside the house, they could hear the muffled sounds of Lucas and Sophia laughing over breakfast. The kids had taken to spending mornings together before school, an arrangement that benefited everyone. I never thought I'd say this, Anna admitted softly, but I'm starting to feel settled here. Like maybe we could actually build a life in this town. Maria reached out and squeezed Anna's hand. I'm so glad to hear that. You deserve to feel at home. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. You know, the fall festival is coming up. Have you thought about volunteering? It's a great way to meet more people in the community. Anna's eyes widened slightly, a mix of interest and apprehension flashing across her face. Do you really think I should? I'm not sure everyone would want me there. Maria felt a flicker of anger at the implication, knowing some of their neighbors hadn't been as welcoming as they should be. Absolutely, she said firmly. This is your town now, too. Besides, they always need help with the kids' activities. Sophia would love seeing you there. Encouraged by Maria's enthusiasm, Anna nodded slowly. Okay, I'll give it a try. Maybe I could help with face painting. I used to do that back home for children's birthdays. Maria grinned, already picturing Anna surrounded by excited kids. That's perfect. I'll introduce you to the organizers this weekend. As they finished their coffee, the sounds of the town waking up filtered through the quiet morning. Mr. Johnson from across the street waved as he collected his newspaper, though Maria noticed his smile didn't quite reach his eyes when he glanced at Anna. She pushed down a twinge of unease, determined to focus on the positive changes she was seeing in her friend. The front door burst open as Lucas and Sophia tumbled out, backpacks in tow. Mom, we're gonna be late, Lucas called out, his voice cracking with adolescent urgency. Sophia hung back slightly, still shy around Maria despite their growing familiarity. Anna stood, gathering her mug. Duty calls, she said with a rueful smile. Same time tomorrow? The crisp autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves as Maria hurried down Main Street. Her shift at the hospital had run late, and she was eager to get home to Lucas. As she passed the local diner, snippets of conversation drifted through the open door, stopping her in her tracks. "I'm telling you, I saw that Anna woman skulking around the back of the store." Mrs. Thompson's shrill voice cut through the buzz of chatter. "And wouldn't you know it, Mr. Grayson reported some inventory missing the very next day." Maria's heart sank as murmurs of agreement rippled through the diner. Without thinking, she pushed open the door, the bell jingling cheerfully in stark contrast to the tension in the room. Conversations hushed as heads turned toward her. Mrs. Thompson sat at the counter, holding court over a cluster of townspeople. Her pinched face twisted into a smug smile as she spotted Maria. "Well, if it isn't Anna's little cheerleader," Mrs. Thompson sneered. "Come to defend your criminal friend?" Maria felt her cheeks flush with anger, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Anna is not a criminal," she said firmly. "She's a hard-working mother, trying to build a better life for her daughter. These accusations are ridiculous." Mr. Grayson, the owner of the local grocery store, stepped forward. His usually kind face was creased with worry. "Look, Maria, I don't want to believe it either, but some things have gone missing, and she was seen hanging around after hours." Maria shook her head in disbelief. "So you're basing this on what exactly? The word of a few busybodies who don't like having a newcomer in town?" The diner fell silent, tension thick in the air. Maria looked around at the faces of people she'd known her whole life. How could they be so quick to judge? "Anna volunteers at the school," she continued, her voice rising. "She's been nothing but kind and grateful since she arrived. If anyone bothered to get to know her, you'd see that." Mrs. Thompson's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You're awfully defensive, Maria. Makes one wonder what you might be hiding." The implication hung heavy in the air, and Maria felt a chill run down her spine. She opened her mouth to retort, but Mr. Grayson placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Maybe it's best if you head home now," he said quietly. As Maria stepped back onto the sidewalk, she could feel the weight of suspicious glances through the diner windows. The town she'd always considered home suddenly felt alien and hostile. She quickened her pace, mind racing. How could she protect Anna from these baseless accusations? And how long before the town's suspicion turned fully on her as well? Maria stood at the checkout counter of Johnson's Grocery, acutely aware of the hushed conversations and sidelong glances around her. The cashier, Betsy, who had always greeted her with a warm smile, now kept her eyes fixed on the register, barely uttering a word as she scanned Maria's items. The tension in the air was palpable, making even the simple act of grocery shopping feel like an ordeal. As she bagged her groceries, Maria caught sight of Mrs. Henderson, her once friendly neighbor, quickly averting her gaze and hurrying down another aisle. The sting of rejection was sharp, but Maria squared her shoulders, determined not to let the town's behavior get to her. She had done nothing wrong, and neither had Anna. At the hospital, the atmosphere wasn't much better. Maria's fellow nurses, who used to chat animatedly with her during breaks, now fell silent when she entered the break room. Dr. Simmons, passing her in the hallway, gave a curt nod instead of his usual friendly greeting. The isolation was starting to wear on her, making each shift feel longer and more draining than ever before. One afternoon, as Maria was changing into her scrubs, she overheard two colleagues whispering just outside the locker room. "I can't believe Maria's defending that woman," one voice hissed. "Who knows what kind of trouble she's bringing to our town?" The other voice chimed in, "I heard they might be involved in something illegal together. Why else would she stick her neck out like this?" Maria's hands trembled as she tied her shoes, fighting back tears of frustration and anger. She wanted to burst out and confront them, to defend herself and Anna. But she knew it would only make things worse. Instead, she took a deep breath, steeling herself for another long shift under the weight of unspoken accusations. The worst part was seeing how the situation affected Lucas. Her son, usually so carefree and enthusiastic, had grown quieter and more withdrawn. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table, Lucas pushed his food around his plate, a troubled expression on his face. "Mom," he said hesitantly, "Coach Bennett didn't put me in the game again today. He said it was because of the situation with our family." Maria's heart sank. She reached across the table, taking Lucas's hand in hers. "I'm so sorry, honey. This isn't fair to you at all." Lucas nodded, his eyes downcast. "Some of the guys on the team, their parents don't want them hanging out with me anymore. They think we're bad news or something." The hurt in his voice was palpable, and Maria felt a surge of protective anger. As she tucked Lucas into bed that night, Maria's mind raced with worry and determination. The town's behavior was inexcusable, but she refused to let it break her spirit or harm her son. She gently brushed Lucas's hair back from his forehead, mustering a reassuring smile. "Things will get better, I promise. We know the truth, and that's what matters. We just need to stay strong and stick together, okay?" Maria paced the worn carpet of her living room, the weight of her predicament pressing down on her shoulders. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, a constant reminder of the decision looming before her. She paused by the window, looking out at the quiet street, where neighbors who once waved cheerfully now hurried past with averted gazes. The sound of the front door opening jolted her from her thoughts. Lucas trudged in, his shoulders slumped and his eyes red-rimmed. Maria's heart clenched at the sight of her usually vibrant son looking so defeated. "Hey, sweetie," she said softly. "How was school today?" Lucas threw his backpack on the floor with more force than necessary, a gesture so uncharacteristic that Maria felt her worry deepen. "It was awful," he muttered, collapsing onto the couch. "Tommy Miller, he said you were a traitor, that you were choosing some criminal over our own town." Maria sat beside him, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Lucas, you know that's not true. Anna is innocent, and standing up for what's right isn't betraying anyone." But even as she spoke the words, doubt gnawed at her. Was her principles worth her son's happiness? His future? "I know, Mom," Lucas sighed, his voice small. "But why does everyone hate us now? Mr. Grayson wouldn't even let me bag groceries after school today. He said they didn't need my help anymore." The hurt in his eyes was like a physical blow to Maria's chest. She pulled Lucas into a tight hug, feeling his body shake with suppressed sobs. Over his shoulder, she caught sight of a framed photo on the side table. Lucas holding up a soccer trophy, his face split in a wide grin. How long had it been since she'd seen him smile like that? As Lucas pulled away, wiping his eyes, Maria felt a surge of protective anger. This town, these people she'd known her whole life, were tearing her family apart over nothing more than prejudice and fear. But another part of her whispered insidiously, "Isn't it your job to protect your son, to give him the best chance at life?" "Mom?" Lucas's voice broke through her swirling thoughts. "What are we going to do?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Maria took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "I don't know yet, honey, but I promise you, we'll figure this out together." Later that night, after Lucas had gone to bed, Maria sat at the kitchen table, a cold cup of tea forgotten before her. She stared at her phone. Anna's number pulled up on the screen. One call, and she could distance herself from this whole mess. Tell Anna it was too risky to be friends anymore. But the very thought made her stomach churn with guilt and shame. Anna's fingers trembled as she clutched her mug of tea, the warmth doing little to dispel the chill that had settled in her bones. Across the kitchen table, Maria sat quietly, her eyes filled with concern and understanding. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed unnaturally loud in the heavy silence that had fallen between them. "I never meant for any of this to happen," Anna finally whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Maybe it would be better if Sophia and I just left. You and Lucas shouldn't have to suffer because of us." The words tasted bitter on her tongue, but the thought of Maria losing everything she'd worked for because of their friendship was unbearable. Maria reached across the table, grasping Anna's hand firmly. "Don't you dare," she said, her voice low and fierce. "You've done nothing wrong, and I won't let them drive you away." Anna looked up, surprised by the intensity in her friend's eyes. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe that everything might actually be okay. Taking a deep breath, Anna steeled herself for what she needed to say next. "There's something I need to tell you, Maria, about why we left, why we came here." She paused, searching for the right words. "Back home, things were difficult, dangerous. My husband, Sophia's father, he was involved with some very bad people." As Anna spoke, the memories she'd tried so hard to bury came flooding back. The late-night arguments, the unexplained bruises, the constant fear. "When I found out what he was really doing, I knew we had to get out. For Sophia's sake," her voice cracked, and Maria squeezed her hand encouragingly. "We moved around a lot at first, always looking over our shoulders. I was so afraid he'd find us." Anna's eyes drifted to a photo of Sophia on the fridge, smiling broadly on her first day of school here. "When we came to this town, it felt like we might finally have a chance at a normal life. And then you..." She trailed off, overcome with gratitude. Maria listened intently, her heart aching for her friend. When Anna finished, she stood up and walked around the table, pulling her into a tight hug. "Thank you for trusting me with this," she murmured. "It doesn't change anything. If anything, it makes me even more certain that standing by you is the right thing to do." As they pulled apart, both women wiping away tears, a knock at the door startled them. Anna tensed immediately, old fears resurging. Maria squeezed her shoulder reassuringly before going to answer it. Through the kitchen doorway, Anna could hear Maria's muffled voice, followed by another she recognized as Mrs. Thompson's shrill tone. She held her breath, wondering what new accusation or demand the town busybody might have in store for them now. The shrill sound of shattering glass pierced the quiet night, jolting Maria from her sleep. Her heart raced as she bolted upright, momentarily disoriented. Then came the terrified scream from next door. Anna's house. Maria threw on her robe and rushed out, barely registering the cool grass beneath her bare feet as she sprinted across the lawn. Anna stood in her doorway, trembling, with Sophia clutching her leg and sobbing uncontrollably. The porch light illuminated the ugly scene. Jagged shards of glass littered the floor inside, and a brick lay ominously among the debris. Maria's stomach churned as she took in the hateful words spray-painted across Anna's front door in angry red letters. "Go home, illegals." "Oh my God, Anna," Maria breathed, pulling her friend and Sophia into a protective embrace. "Are you hurt?" Anna shook her head mutely, her eyes wide with shock and fear. Maria's initial panic gave way to a simmering rage. How dare they? How could anyone do this to a family? To an innocent child? Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as neighbors began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Maria noticed Mrs. Thompson among them, her face a mask of faux concern as she whispered to Mr. Johnson. The hypocrisy made Maria's blood boil. These were the same people who had been spreading rumors and fanning the flames of hatred for weeks. Officer Reyes arrived, his cruiser's lights casting eerie blue shadows across the lawn. Maria had known him since high school, but the man who approached them now seemed like a stranger. He surveyed the scene with a detached air, jotting notes in a small pad. "Looks like some kids got carried away with a prank," he said dismissively. "We'll file a report, but there's not much we can do without witnesses." Maria couldn't believe her ears. "A prank?" she sputtered incredulously. "This is a hate crime, Dave. Look at that graffiti." Officer Reyes shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. "Now, Maria, let's not blow things out of proportion. This town doesn't have hate crimes. It was probably just some teenagers who've had too much to drink." As Officer Reyes turned away to talk to the gathering neighbors, Maria felt a surge of determination. If the police wouldn't take this seriously, then she would have to find another way to protect her friend and expose the truth. She looked at Anna, who was trying to calm a still distraught Sophia, and made a silent vow. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Back in her own house, Maria paced the living room, her mind racing. She needed a plan, a way to fight back against the ignorance and prejudice that had infected her town like a disease. Her eyes fell on the local newspaper sitting on the coffee table, and suddenly an idea began to form. If the authorities wouldn't listen, maybe it was time to take their story public. Maria's kitchen table, once a place of quiet morning coffees and homework sessions, had transformed into a war room. Scattered papers, hastily scribbled notes, and an ever-ringing phone created an atmosphere of urgent purpose. She hung up from yet another call, running a hand through her disheveled hair as she turned to face the small group gathered around her. "Okay, Pastor Jim has agreed to let us use the church basement for the meeting," she announced, a glimmer of hope in her tired eyes. Mrs. Ramirez, Sophia's favorite teacher, nodded approvingly. "That's good. People might be more willing to listen on neutral ground." The others murmured in agreement, their faces a mix of determination and anxiety. Lucas poked his head into the kitchen, concern etched on his young face. "Mom, there's someone at the door. It's Mr. Grayson from the store." Maria felt a flicker of apprehension. Was this another confrontation? She squeezed Lucas's shoulder reassuringly before heading to the front door, squaring her shoulders for whatever might come. To her surprise, Mr. Grayson stood on her porch looking sheepish, a bag of groceries in his arms. "Maria, I wanted to apologize," he stammered. "The way I've been acting, the things I said about Anna, it wasn't right." He thrust the bag towards her. "It's not much, but I thought maybe Anna could use some supplies after, well, you know." Maria blinked back unexpected tears, touched by this small act of kindness. "Thank you, Frank. This means more than you know." She hesitated, then added, "We're having a community meeting next week to talk about everything that's been happening. Would you come?" Mr. Grayson nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think I will. It's time we all started talking to each other instead of about each other." Back in the kitchen, Maria relayed the encounter to her impromptu planning committee. Ms. Chen, the high school's civics teacher, leaned forward eagerly. "This is exactly what we need. People realizing the harm their silence has caused. If we can get more folks like Mr. Grayson to speak up at the meeting, it could really change things." As the group continued strategizing, Maria's phone buzzed with a text from Anna. "Are you sure about this? I don't want you to risk everything for me." Maria's jaw clenched with renewed determination. She quickly typed back, "This isn't just about you anymore. It's about what kind of community we want to be. We're in this together." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Flyers were designed and distributed, carefully worded to invite dialogue rather than accusation. Maria practiced her speech late into the night, weighing each word for maximum impact. She knew that one misstep could derail everything they were working towards. On the eve of the meeting, Maria sat on her porch swing, watching the sun set over the town she'd called home her entire life. The familiar streets and houses now seemed charged with an electric tension, as if the very air was holding its breath in anticipation. Tomorrow would change everything, for better or worse. As darkness fell, Maria closed her eyes and allowed herself a moment of quiet resolve. Whatever happened, she knew in her heart that they were doing the right thing. The church basement hummed with nervous energy as people filed in, filling the rows of folding chairs. Maria stood near the makeshift podium, her palms slick with sweat as she surveyed the crowd. Familiar faces dotted the room. Mr. Grayson sat near the front, offering a hesitant smile, while Mrs. Thompson and her cohort huddled in the back corner, their expressions stony. Pastor Jim stepped up to the microphone, his calm voice cutting through the murmurs. "Friends, neighbors, We're gathered here tonight to have an honest conversation about recent events in our town. I ask that we all listen with open hearts and minds." He nodded to Maria, signaling for her to take the floor. As Maria approached the podium, she caught sight of Lucas in the second row, giving her a thumbs up. She took a deep breath, willing her voice not to shake. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. I know there's been a lot of talk lately about change in our town, about newcomers and what that means for us. But I want to remind you all of something important. We've always been a community that looks out for each other." She paused, making eye contact with various members of the audience. "When the Miller's barn burned down last year, did we ask where they were from before we all pitched in to rebuild? When little Timmy got sick and needed expensive treatments, did we check his family's background before organizing that fundraiser?" A few heads nodded reluctantly. The truth is, we're stronger when we stand together. The fear and suspicion that's been spreading, it's not who we are. It's not the town I grew up in, and it's not the town I want my son to grow up in. Maria's voice grew stronger, fueled by conviction. We have a choice to make. Do we let fear divide us, or do we choose kindness and understanding? As Maria stepped back, Anna took her place. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone. I never wanted to cause trouble for anyone," she began softly. "My daughter and I came here looking for safety, for a chance at a better life, just like many of your own ancestors did generations ago." Anna's voice cracked as she recounted her journey, the dangers she'd fled, the sacrifices she'd made for Sophia. "All I want is to work hard, to contribute to this community, to give my daughter a chance to grow up without fear." Tears glistened in her eyes, and Maria saw several audience members shift uncomfortably in their seats. But not everyone was swayed. From the back of the room, Mrs. Thompson's voice rang out, sharp and accusatory. "That's all very touching, but how do we know you're telling the truth? For all we know, you could be here illegally, taking advantage of our generosity." A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. Maria's hands shook as she unfolded the crumpled note she'd found tucked under her windshield wiper. The crude handwriting sent a chill down her spine. "Traitors get what's coming to them. Watch your back." She quickly crumpled it up again, glancing around the hospital parking lot nervously before hurrying inside for her shift. The atmosphere at work had grown increasingly tense. Nurse Patel, who had spoken up at the meeting in support of Anna, was conspicuously absent. "Called in sick," their supervisor muttered when Maria asked, avoiding eye contact. The implication hung heavy in the air. Nurse Patel's husband owned the local pharmacy, which had seen a sudden drop in customers over the past few days. At home, Lucas slammed the front door, his face a storm cloud of anger and hurt. "They won't stop, Mom!" he choked out, dropping his backpack with a thud. "Tommy and his friends, they keep saying we should go back where we came from, but we're from here." Maria pulled her son close, her heart breaking at the tremor in his voice. How had their home become so unrecognizable? The next morning, Maria's phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Grayson. "Someone smashed my store windows last night. Spray-painted immigrant lover on the sidewalk. Police say there's nothing they can do." She stared at the screen in disbelief, a mixture of guilt and anger churning in her stomach. This had gone too far. As she drove to work, Maria noticed an unfamiliar van parked across from Anna's house. A woman with a camera stood on the sidewalk, talking intently with Anna. It took Maria a moment to recognize the logo on the van. It was from a major news network in the city. The civil rights group had made good on their promise to bring attention to their plight. By lunchtime, the town was buzzing with the news. Maria's phone lit up with notifications. Their story was trending on social media, with people from all over the country weighing in. Some offered support and encouragement, while others spewed vitriol that made her stomach turn. The spotlight felt both liberating and terrifying. Officer Reyes cornered her in the hospital cafeteria, his face a mask of barely contained frustration. "What have you done, Maria?" he hissed. "The mayor's office is being flooded with calls. We've got reporters sniffing around, asking about hate crimes and police negligence. Maria met his gaze steadily, a spark of defiance flaring in her chest. Maybe now you'll have to take this seriously, she replied coolly. As she left work that evening, Maria was surprised to see a small group gathered on the hospital lawn. They held handmade signs, "Hate has no home here," and "Support our neighbors." Among them, she recognized faces from the church meeting, along with a few of her co-workers. Ms. Chen waved her over, a determined glint in her eye. "We thought you could use some backup," she said with a smile. For the first time in weeks, Maria felt a flicker of hope. They weren't alone in this fight. The town square buzzed with an electric tension as two groups faced off across the manicured lawn. On one side, a sea of colorful signs bobbed in the air, held aloft by a diverse crowd chanting messages of support and unity. "Love thy neighbor" and "Diversity makes us stronger" competed with the steady rhythm of "Hey, hey, ho, ho, xenophobia's got to go." Across the square, a smaller but no less vocal group had assembled. Their signs bore harsher slogans, "Protect our town" and "America first." The air crackled with hostility as shouts and jeers were exchanged between the factions. Officer Reyes and his colleagues formed a human barrier between the groups, their faces grim with the effort of maintaining order. Maria stood at the edge of the pro-honor crowd, her heart racing as she scanned the faces of her neighbors and former friends among the opposition. She caught sight of Mrs. Thompson, her pinched face flushed with anger as she shouted something inaudible over the din. For a moment their eyes met, and Maria felt a wave of sadness wash over her. How had it come to this? A hush fell over the crowd as Mayor Johnson approached the hastily erected podium at the center of the square. His usually jovial face was drawn with worry as he tapped the microphone. "My fellow citizens," he began, his voice wavering slightly, "I stand before you today with a heavy heart. Our town, once known for its warmth and hospitality, has become a symbol of division and intolerance." As the mayor spoke of the need for understanding and compassion, Maria felt a tug on her sleeve. She turned to find Anna beside her, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. "I need to speak," Anna whispered urgently. "If I don't face them now, nothing will change." Maria hesitated, weighing the risks, but nodded. Sometimes, courage was the only way forward. They made their way through the crowd, approaching Officer Reyes at the barrier. He looked at them warily, but after a moment's hesitation, he stepped aside to let them pass. The shouts from the opposition grew louder as Anna walked towards the podium, but she kept her head high, her steps steady. Mayor Johnson faltered mid-sentence as Anna reached him. For a tense moment, it seemed he might turn her away. Then, to Maria's relief, he nodded and stepped back, gesturing for Anna to take his place. The square fell into an uneasy silence as Anna faced the crowd, her hands gripping the podium tightly. "I know many of you are afraid," Anna began, her voice surprisingly strong. "You're afraid of change, of the unknown. I understand that fear because I've lived with it every day since coming to this country." She paused, taking a deep breath. "But I'm also afraid that my daughter will grow up believing she doesn't belong anywhere, afraid that hate will win over hope." As Anna continued to speak, her words seemed to hang in the air, and Maria noticed some of the anger in the opposing crowd begin to falter, replaced by uncertainty and, in some faces, a glimmer of empathy. Maria stood at the front of the high school auditorium, her voice carrying over the sea of young faces before her. "Change starts with you," she declared, her eyes scanning the crowd. "Each of you has the power to shape the future of this town." The students listened intently, some nodding in agreement, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. After the assembly, Lucas approached his mother, pride shining in his eyes. "That was awesome, Mom," he grinned. "I think you really got through to some people." Maria ruffled his hair affectionately, noticing how he stood a little taller these days. The past few weeks had been tough, but they'd also revealed a strength in her son she hadn't fully appreciated before. As they walked through the school hallways, Maria noticed small changes. Posters advocating for kindness and inclusion dotted the walls, and she overheard snippets of conversations about fairness and justice. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Lucas waved to a group of his friends, a mix of familiar faces and some she didn't recognize. "Hey, Mom," he said, "is it cool if Sophia joins us for pizza night on Friday?" Some of the guys wanted to meet her. At home, Maria found Anna sitting on her porch steps, a tentative smile on her face. "I just got off the phone with Mr. Grayson," Anna said excitedly. "He's offered me a job at the store. Said he could use someone who speaks Spanish to help with the growing Latino customer base." Maria's heart swelled with joy at the news. It was a small victory, but an important one. Later that evening, as Maria was preparing dinner, a knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Mrs. Henderson, her elderly neighbor, standing there with a casserole dish in her hands. I wanted to apologize," Mrs. Henderson said softly. "I've been thinking about what you said at the town meeting. My own parents were immigrants, you know. I'd forgotten what that was like for them." The next day, Maria noticed a change in the atmosphere at the hospital. Nurse Patel was back at work, greeted with warm smiles from most of their colleagues. During their lunch break, Dr. Simmons approached Maria's table. "I've been thinking," he said, settling into a chair, "we should start a free clinic for undocumented residents. Proper health care shouldn't depend on paperwork." Maria felt a surge of hope at his words. As she drove home that evening, Maria spotted a group of teenagers painting over the hateful graffiti that had marred the side of Anna's house. Among them, she recognized Lucas and some of his friends. They waved as she passed, their faces bright with purpose. Maria honked in support, her heart full of pride and renewed determination. That night, as Maria sat on her porch swing, watching the sun set over her changing town, she felt a sense of cautious optimism. There was still a long way to go, but something had shifted. People were talking, questioning long-held beliefs, and taking small but significant steps towards change. She took a deep breath of the cool evening air, ready to face whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. The town square, once a place of quiet gatherings and summer picnics, now resembled a war zone. The air was thick with tension and the acrid smell of tear gas. On one side, a sea of angry faces contorted with rage, their voices raised in a cacophony of hate. "Go back where you came from," they chanted, fists pumping in the air. Opposite them, a wall of determined supporters stood their ground, their own chants of love not hate, barely audible over the din. Maria found herself at the epicenter of the chaos, her heart pounding as she scanned the crowd for Anna and Sophia. She spotted them huddled near the steps of the town hall, fear etched on their faces. As she pushed her way through the throng, a bottle sailed through the air, shattering at her feet. Glass shards scattered across the pavement, glinting in the harsh sunlight like a twisted mosaic. "Anna!" Maria shouted, finally reaching her friend. "We need to get you out of here!" Anna clutched Sophia tightly, the little girl's face buried in her mother's shirt. "Maria, I'm so sorry," Anna sobbed. "This is all my fault." Maria shook her head vehemently, grabbing Anna's arm. "No, this is not your fault. This is about them, not you. Come on, we need to move." As they tried to edge away from the crowd, a group of men in dark jackets suddenly surged forward. Their faces were contorted with anger, eyes wild with a hatred that sent chills down Maria's spine. "There they are!" one of them shouted, pointing at Anna. "Get them!" Maria's instincts kicked in, and she pushed Anna and Sophia behind her, forming a human shield. Just as the men were about to reach them, a line of police officers in riot gear materialized, creating a barrier between the aggressors and Maria's group. Officer Reyes was at the front, his face a mask of determination. "Stand down!" he barked at the approaching men. "This ends now!" For a moment, it seemed like the men might charge through, but then they hesitated, clearly unprepared for this show of force from the police. In the momentary lull, Maria heard a familiar voice cutting through the chaos. Lucas was standing on a nearby bench, his young face fierce with conviction. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice cracking but still carrying over the crowd. "Look at what we're doing! This isn't who we are!" A hush fell over the square as people turned to look at the teenager who dared to speak out. Lucas continued, his words tumbling out with raw emotion. "I've known most of you my whole life. You taught me to ride a bike. You cheered for me at soccer games. Are you really going to throw all that away because you're scared of someone different?" His eyes found Mrs. Thompson in the crowd. "Mrs. Thompson, you baked cookies for our class every Christmas. Is this the legacy you want to leave?" As Lucas spoke, Maria saw something shift in the faces around her. The anger began to fade, replaced by confusion and, in some cases, shame. Even some of the most vocal opponents looked uncomfortable now, avoiding eye contact with their neighbors. The riot seemed to deflate, the energy dissipating like air from a balloon. The community center buzzed with nervous energy as people filed in for the first of the mayor's unity dialogues. Chairs were arranged in a large circle, forcing everyone to face each other. Maria watched as former adversaries awkwardly took their seats, the tension palpable in the air. Anna sat beside her, fidgeting with the hem of her shirt, her eyes darting around the room. Mayor Johnson cleared his throat, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a more somber tone. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "What happened last week, it's not who we are, or at least, it's not who we want to be. We're here to listen, to understand, and to find a way forward together." He gestured to Dr. Ramirez, a conflict resolution specialist from the nearby university. Dr. Ramirez will be guiding our discussion today. As the dialogue began, Maria was struck by the rawness of emotions in the room. Mrs. Thompson, her face etched with lines of worry, spoke first. I've always prided myself on being a good Christian," she said, her voice quavering. "But the things I said, the way I acted, that wasn't Christian at all. I'm ashamed." She turned to Anna, tears welling in her eyes. "Can you ever forgive me?" Anna reached across the circle, grasping Mrs. Thompson's hand. "There's nothing to forgive," she said softly. "We all have fears. What matters is what we do with them." The simple act of kindness seemed to break something open in the room. Soon, others were sharing their own stories, their own fears and regrets. Mr. Grayson spoke of his immigrant grandparents and the struggles they faced. Officer Reyes admitted to the bias he hadn't even realized he held. Even some of the most vocal opponents of Anna's presence in town found themselves opening up, their defenses crumbling in the face of honest dialogue. As the meeting progressed, Maria noticed a change in the atmosphere. The initial tension had given way to something else, a shared vulnerability, a collective desire to do better. Ideas began to flow, a multicultural food festival, language exchange programs, joint community service projects. People who had been at odds just days ago were now eagerly planning ways to bring the town together. Outside the community center, Lucas waited with a group of his friends. They had spent the afternoon putting up posters for an upcoming Unity Through Music concert they were organizing. As Maria and Anna emerged, Lucas bounded over, his face alight with excitement. "Mom, you won't believe it. We got that famous jazz band to agree to play. And Sophia's going to teach everyone some traditional dances from your home country. Right, Sophia?" Sophia, who had been shyly hiding behind Anna, nodded with a small smile. I think people might like to learn," she said softly. Maria felt a surge of pride and hope. This was just the beginning, she knew. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt, but looking at the faces around her, Anna's cautious optimism, Lucas's determination, the genuine effort she saw in her neighbor's eyes, she felt, for the first time in months, that real change was possible. The warm summer breeze carried the scent of grilling burgers and the sound of laughter across the town park. Colorful banners fluttered overhead, proclaiming Oakville's first annual Unity Festival in bold letters. Maria stood at the edge of the crowd, taking in the scene with a mixture of pride and amazement. Just a year ago, this kind of gathering would have been unthinkable. Anna approached, balancing 2 plates piled high with an eclectic mix of foods from the various cultural booths. "You have to try Mrs. Thompson's empanadas," she said with a grin. "Who knew she had it in her?" Maria laughed, accepting the plate gratefully. The sight of Mrs. Thompson, once their fiercest opponent, now cheerfully serving up Latin American cuisine, was a testament to how far they'd come. Across the park, Lucas was engaged in an animated conversation with a group of teens from diverse backgrounds. They were huddled around a large poster board, planning what looked like their next community project. Maria felt a swell of pride watching her son, noting how confidently he carried himself these days. The challenges they'd faced had transformed him from a shy, uncertain boy into a young leader. "Maria, Anna!" Mr. Grayson's voice called out. They turned to see him waving them over to a small stage area. "We're about to start the talent show. Sophia's up first." Anna's eyes widened in surprise. "I didn't know she was performing," she murmured, a mix of excitement and nervousness in her voice. Maria squeezed her friend's hand reassuringly as they made their way through the crowd. Sophia took the stage, looking tiny behind the microphone. But as she began to sing a traditional song from her homeland, her voice rang out clear and strong. The crowd fell silent, captivated by the young girl's performance. Maria glanced at Anna, seeing tears glistening in her eyes. This moment, Sophia sharing her culture openly and proudly, represented everything they had fought for. As the day wore on, Maria found herself in conversation with Officer Reyes. "You know," he said, his tone thoughtful, "I've been thinking about starting a community policing program, something to build trust, especially with our immigrant population." Maria nodded encouragingly, offering to help with the planning. It was another small step, but an important one. Later, as the sun began to set, Mayor Johnson called everyone's attention to the stage. "I want to thank Maria and Anna," he announced, his voice carrying across the park. "Their courage and perseverance have made our town a better place for everyone." A cheer went up from the crowd, and Maria felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment and pride. As darkness fell and families began to pack up, Maria and Anna found themselves alone on a park bench. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the last of the festival goers trickle out. "Did you ever think we'd see a day like this?" Anna asked softly. Maria shook her head, smiling. "No, but I'm glad we did, and I'm glad we did it together." The two friends linked arms, their bond stronger than ever, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Now, how about another one? To watch another nice story, just click on the video appearing on your screen.